Good morning. Good morning. My name is Ronnie Stewart. I'm the chair of the Department of Surgery, and it is a very special honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Bono today. Before I get started with that, I think it's also really worth noting and honoring that this is really a story of a hometown San Antonian who is coming back to be our visiting professor, and tremendous inspirational success story in so many ways. And I would like to start. This is our 50th anniversary of the medical school, and I think this medical school has a unique relationship with the military medical community. Really is in many ways the truest, most integrated civilian military trauma program in the country. And this story really began about 50 years ago from a branch of the Owen Wangenstein family of surgery. That's where it came from, and it's very interesting and in some ways a little odd that 8 people would come from Minnesota to Texas, which was what came to a place that Texans would call a deer lease in the middle of the country, really. That's what this was when that original faculty arrived. There was a whole set of challenges that came along with that. When Dr. Cruz first arrived, the first news he received was the hospital was not going to open. So there were a series of challenges, but that original group of faculty of Dr. Alst, Dr. Root, Dr. Anatolio B. Cruz, Dr. Carlos Pestana, Dr. Arthur McPhee, Dr. Wade Rogers, Dr. Leo Cuello, and Dr. Jim Story partnered with their friend and colleague who happened to be a young person at the U.S. Army Institute for Surgical Research, Dr. Basil Pruitt, and they built a partnership, a military-civilian partnership that I think that the testament to that partnership is evident today in San Antonio. And they had a unique gift, though, of mentorship. If you look at that group of faculty, they've mentored more than 25 chairs of academic departments across the country. And really laid the foundation for what became the Joint Trauma System, the South Texas's really tremendously successful regional trauma system and emergency healthcare system. And so, but one of those products was Vice Admiral Raquel Bono. It's very, very true. Dr. Bono was given this advice by her father, Dr. Anatolio B. Cruz, and her mom, Dr. Rose Cruz: service to others, service to country. Service to others, service to country. She said that was ingrained in us from a very young age. The Cruz family is very special. I know that, and that's true, but it's clearly very special. And you know it's special when your 18-year-old daughter, is after she meets the Cruz family at what she refers to as the mini Cruz family reunion, and your 18-year-old daughter is repeatedly asking, when are you going to invite Dr. Bono to be the visiting professor here in San Antonio? But a very special family, if I have it correctly, 2 admirals, 2 Naval Academy graduates, and then if you look at the people that Dr. Cruz has mentored, myself being one of them. I was a 3rd-year medical student on Dr. Cruz's Surgery C service in 1983. Have really transformed care across the globe, both to our deployed uniformed service personnel and to civilians. So a very, very special family. But Dr. Bono went to high school at the Ursuline Academy. She was a graduate of UT Austin. She was recognized as a distinguished alumna in 2017 and gave the commencement address at UT Austin this current year. She graduated from medical school at Texas Tech Medical School as a fellow West Texan. It's a warm place in my heart, so thank you very much. She attended Texas Tech on a Navy Health Professions scholarship, did her residency at the Naval Hospital in Portsmouth, was the first woman to graduate from that program. Did her trauma surgery critical care fellowship at the great program at Eastern Virginia. And she deployed in Desert Storm. Also an interesting story, I have our oldest daughter, now 27. I remember when she was first born, she was not more than a few weeks old, going to the Cruz family dinner when Dr. Anatolio B. Cruz was about to deploy with his daughter. His daughter's in the desert, he's on the ship. We're deployed at the same time. And after that, Dr. Bono went on to be Chief of Trauma, leading surgical critical care at Portsmouth, and she's held a wide range of leadership positions inside the Navy and the Department of Defense since that time. Her career has been marked by service, excellence in all that she does, and partnership. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Raquel Bono, who's going to talk to us today on ambidextrous, on being a surgeon, managing change in leadership. Thank you very much for coming.
So most of you know me that I don't like to stand behind the podium, or those of you that have heard me talk, and partly it's because I'm vertically challenged, and most podia, is that the plural form of that, are about as tall as I am. So I don't oftentimes spend very much time behind the podium. Thank you very much. I mean, I'm incredibly honored at this privilege to be invited here to spend time with you guys. And I'm amazed, too, that as I've been standing here, how many folks I've actually had a chance to interact with and meet already, or have come from my past. My blast from the past is here. So if I could, I was going to build on a couple of things that Dr. Stewart shared with you. I wanted to tell you about that time that I got deployed to the Gulf War, because it's apropos. Some of the folks in the audience in uniform will understand this part. It's heartwarming for a lot of different reasons. So I was deployed with the Fleet Hospital, which was a ground-based unit out of Portsmouth Naval Hospital. And we were deployed at the very beginning of the war. So when we got in country, we were considered pretty close to what was then the front line of that conflict. I also knew that my dad had been mobilized. He was a reservist at the time. I knew that he'd been mobilized and he was going to go to the Mercy out of San Diego. So when we found out that we were going to be in the same AOR, we were trying to find a way to connect with each other. And I was in casualty receiving. I'd been charged with standing it up, and I was like maybe 3 months out of my trauma fellowship, so I knew what I was doing, right? You know? I knew exactly what I was doing. So I'm setting up the resuscitation, the casualty receiving in Saudi Arabia, and I hear that the Mercy is going to be coming into the AOR. And I'm thinking, you know, how do I get in touch with my dad? I mean, what do I do? I mean, I had no idea. And so we had these phones set up. I mean, they weren't connected to AT&T. I mean, I'm going to really date myself, you know, when I tell you this part. I mean, it took them 3 months to put up a bank of phones where I was stationed in Saudi Arabia. I mean, but that's because we didn't have cell phones like we do now. So we had these other phones, though, that were in the hospital, in the casualty receiving, the Fleet Hospital 5 that we had set up, which was meant for us to talk to each other between the ICU and surgery and casualty receiving and the wards. And then all of a sudden, in casualty receiving, the phone rings, and somebody tells me that they were able to patch the Mercy in to our phone in casualty receiving. And it turns out it's my dad on the phone. I mean, trust my dad to figure out how to do that. So he's calling, he goes, hey, you want to go to lunch? I'm going, I'd love to go to lunch, but what are you talking about? He says, well, see if you can find a way to come to the ship. I thought, you know, at the time, I'm like a lieutenant commander, you know, he's like a captain. So that's the difference between an 04 and an 06, so several ranks above me. I'm going, you know, Dad, it's not that easy. So then I'm thinking, okay, how do I do this? How do I do this? Well, attached to our fleet hospital was a crew of Black Hawk helicopter pilots. They were the medevac for us in the area. It just so happened, though, that, see, they were stationed they were with us, they were housed with us. Well, they had to do their landing quals on the Mercy. So I found this out. So I made friends with the helicopter pilots, and I said, next time you go do your landing quals on the Mercy, you mind if I tag along? I mean, I had no idea. I'm probably revealing some kind of horrendous transgression. So, so I hope there's a statute of limitations on this. But I asked them the next time they go on their landing quals if I could go on with them. And they said, sure. I mean, you know, there was just the pilot and the co-pilot. And so I get on this helicopter and we go over to the Mercy, and I'm thinking, you know, and then as they're landing, I'm thinking, gee, I hope they've done this a couple of times, you know, because I didn't want to be just the first test case. So we land on the Mercy, and my dad and I are able to have lunch there in the galley, or the defect, as some of you may call it. And I know there's a picture somewhere in the archives of the Mercy that have my dad and I have it with us together there. I'm not sure where that picture ended up. But that was one of our adventures of being deployed together. Now, my mom was a wreck the entire time we were gone, because the other person who was put on notice was my brother, who you just heard had graduated from the Naval Academy. He was in the reserves at the same time. He was actually with a SEAL unit. And one of the things that they had put him on a 24-hour notice. So that would have meant that half of our family would have been in serving simultaneously, which was just a little, it was bad enough when I got the first order to deploy, because that's not exactly how my mother saw my career unfolding in the Navy. But then when my dad got his activation order, and then my brother was put on the 24-hour notice, that was really rough for my mom. But it was something that was very much a part of what signified and represented what being a part of the, you know, being a cruise meant in our family. And so I share that story because there's so much. There's a military audience here, and I really am very appreciative of that. But the history that you guys share here with the university hospital and the military is so strong. I have one other story that I want to start off with, actually two, because it is about ambidexterity that I wanted to talk about. So growing up, you know, my dad was did his residency at Minnesota, as you all know. And I was the eldest child, so my privilege was being able to wait up for my dad when he came home from rounds, or when he finished up his day at the hospital. And to me, it was kind of late, but I got to have a few bites of dinner with him before my mother would send me off to bed. And you know, it was at that time when I told him, he said, Dad, you know, I want to come work in the hospital so I can see you every day. And I started naming all the things that I would do. And he stopped me. He says, well, why don't you want to be a doctor? And I said, well, I didn't know girls could be doctors. And that's my dad said, you can be anything you want. You know, and I grew up with that, which comes in really handy when you've got two brothers, you know. You know? No, Dad told me I could be anything I want. So fast forward to when I have my own kids, and I've got 3 girls now, but my oldest daughter, she's in 2nd grade, and she wanted to know what I do, and I told her. And at that time, I was the director of surgical services in Bethesda. And so I tell her about what it's like to be a naval officer, and what it's like to be a surgeon, and you know, how I take care of people. And patients come to me, and they have something that's bothering them or hurting them, and I get to take them to the operating room and fix them. And then I get to make sure that they're all better. So I'm telling her this. And for those of you that are parents, you'll know this moment, you know, when your child is just transfixed on you, and you're having one of those parent moments where you think, I'm such a good parent, you know? It's very fleeting for those of you that know it, and you've got to hold on to it. But she's just looking at me intently, and she goes, Mama, can boys be doctors too? I had to think of my response very carefully. So The other thing too, that when I decided that I was going to go into surgery, I was one of those people. I was that medical student that loved every rotation I did. You know, I went into medical school thinking, you know, I'm going to be a surgeon. But then I started doing these clinical rotations, and it was kind of like, oh, I like that. Well, the only thing, and I'm sorry if I offend anybody here, the only thing that I really couldn't get, you know, really enthusiastic about, and I'm really sorry, I hate to say this out loud, was pediatrics. Sorry, I hope I don't offend anybody here, but that was the only clinical rotation. I mean, I love the kids. The parents were a little bit too much for me to put up with. But I loved every one of my clinical rotations. And it came down to trying to decide what area did I want to pursue. And it came down to OBGYN and surgery. Now, I don't know if you know this, but my grandfather, my dad's dad, was an OBGYN surgeon. Yeah, so it runs in the family. My dad would say that's part of my genetic makeup. So it came down to OBGYN and general surgery, and I thought, what is it that I want to do? I had the most deliveries at Texas Tech as a med student. I was very proud of that. You know, I got all the Q&A at surgical rounds, which was not an easy thing as a med student sometimes to do. But I realized that if I was up at 2 o'clock in the morning with OBGYN, I was afraid that I'd be waiting for something to happen. But if I was up at 2 a.m. in general surgery, it was likely that I'd be doing something, and probably likely be in the OR, which was a place that I just absolutely loved. So I thought, no, surgery's it. That's, you know, I'm going to go with my original thing. Final answer, surgery. So as I made that announcement, as I applied for surgical training programs, my dad told me it was very important, it's extremely important, to learn how to tie one-handed ties, to throw your one-handed throws, both left and right-handed. And you need to be as dexterous with your left hand, your non-dominant hand, as your dominant hand. So I spent like the last 6 months of my medical school with those strands of suture. I don't know, does anyone still do that? Where you're practicing. So I practice, since my dominant hand is my right hand, I practice primarily with my left hand, throwing one-handed throws until I became as quick with my left hand as I was with my right hand. But it was my dad who told me, he goes, it's extremely important. Now, for bonus points, and if you have the right price, I'll show you another trick that he showed me about throwing a square knot with one throw. But anyway, it was because of him that he kept on urging me to be ambidextrous, because you never knew what kind of surgical situation you'd be faced with when you would need to be able to throw a knot successfully with your non-dominant hand. Now, he also told me, he goes, don't be dependent on instrument throws or instrument ties, which always looks very classy. You know, it's also very impressive when you can throw those knots there with the instruments. But it was something that really sat with me and helped me understand that in order to be successful in a variety of situations, you had to prepare for those situations, even though you didn't know what those situations would look like. So I wanted to be able to talk to you, and I'm glad to see the audience and the composition of the audience. And I bet you there's some rogue military that are in scrubs over here, and that's okay. That's all right. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the change that's going on in military medicine. And I think it's extremely appropriate because of the strong partnership that you have here in San Antonio. And it has been a model for many years, and it's something that I think will help us move forward as we face some of the challenges that we have in the military health system. So in 2016, the Congress came together and wrote a bill that directed that Army medicine, Navy medicine, and Air Force medicine come together under the Defense Health Agency. And what they were looking for with that particular bill was to try to find a way to create synergy across all of the military medical services. Now, let me give you a little bit of background for why they were interested in this. For those of you that don't know, the military health system is an extremely robust system, but it costs us about $50 billion a year to support our military health system. Now, some of you probably have some prior line experience, so you know what $50 billion can buy in terms of a Joint Strike Fighter, or some tanks, or some weapons, or some other very, very costly tools that we need in the military to make sure we maintain our national security. So $50 billion a year, and it was starting to climb. So Congress took a real interest in that because we're considered a top-line budget item, a top-line Department of Defense item, which means that no matter what that amount is to deliver for care, Congress has to find a way to pay for it. So they were trying to ask us, can you find a way of controlling some of your costs? Now, that is not an unusual request from any of our healthcare systems today. And as a matter of fact, if you look to see what Kaiser, Cleveland Clinics, even Mayo, a lot of well-known healthcare systems are doing is they're trying to find ways that they can optimize the dollars they spend for healthcare. And it's something that we didn't get when I was going through medical school. We didn't get that situational awareness or that training to help us understand some of those type of market imperatives. I'm very excited when I look at some of the curricula of medical schools and training programs, residencies, when I see how they try to make you more aware about that. And I think it's extremely important that that become a part of our medical education. So in that, though, there was 43 sections in that bill. Now here is the amazing thing. If you looked at the bill, okay, so here's another true confession. I wasn't a very good civics student. So I didn't know how bills became law. I had to go to the Schoolhouse Rock video on YouTube to figure out how a bill became a law. So, I mean, I was much better at organic and chemistry and biology, although I had a little trouble with chemistry, as my dad will tell you. I couldn't figure out Avogadro's, I couldn't figure out what a mole was very well. I had to work really hard at that. So, so here's what the amazing thing about the bill is the House had their proposal. Okay, so this is how it works. The House puts in their bill, and I'm sorry if I'm offending you guys. The House puts in their bill, the Senate puts in theirs. They come together in conference and they decide what the final bill looks like. And then they have to vote on it, and they have various members of Congress who vote on it. And then it becomes the final bill, and then that becomes, that goes forward to the president for signature, where it becomes statute, where statute equals law. So in 2016, the House put up their bill and the Senate put up theirs bill, and they were remarkably similar in that they were asking the same thing. And the thing they were asking for was Army medicine, Navy medicine, and Air Force medicine to come together and to be a little bit more integrated. But if you read what their justification for that is, they really concentrated on the experience of care for our patients. They had heard from our patients, our beneficiaries, that it was hard navigating the system whenever they went to a military treatment facility, a hospital, or what we call MTFs. In other words, we had a different appointing system at BAMC than we did at San Diego. We had a different appointing system at Portsmouth than we had at Jacksonville, or Eglin, or Seymour Johnson. And they said the experience of care for your patients, our voters, is something that's getting our attention, plus the fact that you have a very high price tag. So they asked us to come together and try to integrate our system a little bit better. Now, there were 43 sections in there, but there was only one section that everyone paid attention to. And I bet you if I asked the audience on this side, you would probably be able to tell me which section that was. This is the interactive part. What section was it that everybody would concentrate on? What's that? Patient satisfaction was a really big part of what they were driving us towards, but there was a particular section in the statute itself that was 702. And 702 said that the DHA would now have oversight of the budget, IT, a healthcare plan, the whole slew of things that were part of military medicine. And that got a few people upset. So here's where I'm going to talk a little bit about change management and leading and being a part of this change, and why you need to have some ambidexterity in managing change. So there are a lot of things in that statute that really threatened a lot of people, because it represented a change from the usual way of how they delivered care, or how they organized their medical systems. We essentially had 3 separate medical systems. And like I like to tell people, especially non-medical folks who really get this, you know, there are only a certain number, I believe I mentioned this to some people last night too, there are only a certain number of orifices that you can take someone's temperature. And it doesn't matter what uniform they're wearing, and it doesn't matter what uniform the person who's got the thermometer is holding. And as some of my aviation colleagues like to say, you know, blood is blood. They couldn't understand why we weren't a little bit more together on this. So here's the deal. That law, everyone was thinking, you know, I can't believe this is coming out of nowhere, it's coming out of left field, we didn't see this coming, you know, how is this came about? So here's the part about managing change. The first thing is you have to understand where this change is coming from. So if you happen to take a look at military health, and I've become a real student now of World War II for a variety of reasons, but in understanding why this statute came about, since 1948, there have been 18 studies on the military health system. Of those 18 studies, 15 recommended that we centralize more of our functions and come together. 15 of the 18. So, and these are external and internal blue ribbon panels. These are outside experts in the healthcare industry, and these are experts from within the military medical arena. So 15 of the 18 recommended that we get more centralized. Now, if that represented a series of double-blind studies or peer-reviewed studies or articles that you've had to study, and you were making a recommendation to your patient about what kind of care, would you go deliberately to the 3 that didn't recommend the same thing? Or would you at least feel that there was some merit in the 15 of the 18 that came to a similar conclusion? So understand where the change is coming from and how and what led up to this. Now, between 1948 and today, there's been a whole other series of things that have happened. We've had one of the longest campaigns going on. We're still in a campaign now, the last 17, going on 17 years of war. And in this war, and you guys, all of you here, have had a direct impact on our ability to be so successful in taking care of the wounded warriors and the casualties of this war. We've had the highest survivability in spite of increasing ISS on our wounded warriors. And that is incredible. But it wouldn't have happened, what I like to tell people, it wouldn't have happened unless all of us had been collective and focused on the singular goal of saving who we were taking care of. And I have a command sergeant major who works for me, who is Army, and one of the things that he likes to talk about is in those resuscitation units and in the ORs, you couldn't tell what service a person was unless they happened to be wearing their boots. Which kind of begs the question why we have different boots in the first place. Because I think we're all gravitating to the same kind of desert look or coyote boots. But that's when we are the strongest, when we are working together like that. Now, in the statute, what it also allows us to do is to increase our partnerships. It allows us to increase our partnerships with the VA, with civilian institutions, with universities and academic settings. And when I saw that part of the statute, I was all over that, because what I first thought of was San Antonio. And how do we use this to continue to grow what we need to do and expand what we do in the military health system? So I think that this is an area that I've spent a lot of time studying. I have a lot of folks here that I very much enjoy the collaboration and the partnerships that we've already started looking at. I think there's tremendous opportunity to continue that going forward. But I think it's also important that in part of managing change, the thing that you want to also be cognizant of is how you can be a part of that change, right? So as you're getting to know why the change is coming about, then one of the first things you want to do then is figure out how do you become a part of that change? How do you make sure that you're someone who can be a part of shaping the change instead of waiting for it to happen to you? And this is something that we don't oftentimes do very well in medicine, especially when you've finished a very rigorous training program where you finally feel like you've gotten it, that you know how to do this, and you've got a certain set of routines that you feel very comfortable with, and you know with a high degree of reliability that they're going to end up in a similar way each time. So it's sometimes very, very challenging for us to be able to understand or see the benefits of being a part of this change. So here's the other piece then that I want to offer to you. Your whole training, regardless of where you are trained by your attendings to be constantly challenging the conventional wisdom. And as a matter of fact, many of our training programs now include mandatory research time. And I think it's specifically designed to make you challenge conventional thinking and see if you can create new understanding or new knowledge by seeing something through a slightly different lens. There are very few things that are just, you know, really big standalone inventions. Maybe the Post-it note might be. But everything else comes from bringing together two ideas that you didn't see were connected in the first place. So to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I recently had a chance to go to Louisville, Kentucky. And I had a chance to visit the UPS headquarters there. Now the thing about Louisville, Kentucky and their airport, you can't fly international out of that airport unless you're a box, because UPS is the only airplane that flies internationally out of Louisville, Kentucky. But here's what I noticed when they were showing me their operations. As they showed me how they moved these boxes and how they minimize the downtime on the ground and how they have these series of partnerships, what I was thinking was, how would I use UPS's thinking and programming or program to move our patients through an equally complex system? How could I optimize the way our patients move across our system? Is there something that I can learn from UPS on how to do that? Now, I think most of you know the story about UPS when they're on the ground. They only make right turns, or then maybe that's FedEx, but they only make right turns. I don't know if I can design a hospital where our patients only make right turns. But the point is that there are lessons out there, there are ideas out there that allow us to kind of include that in how we take care of our patients. So you want to be a part of that change. You also want to understand where you can learn some things and how you can continue to innovate. And you want to challenge your conventional thinking. And that's sometimes really hard to do. So then I wanted to spend a few minutes now talking about leadership, and then I'd love to hear some of the thoughts and questions or reactions that you might have. So I've always been a firm believer that leadership is not necessarily all about who works for you. As a matter of fact, you know, as a parent, I mean, I consider my kids working for me, but they never pay attention. I mean, they never do exactly what I want them to do. And neither does relying on your position. So you would think that as a 3-star admiral that it'd be pretty easy for me to get people to do things that, you know, that I just tell them to do, like I give them an order and it happens. The only thing that's pretty consistent is that when I walk into a room, most people in military know to stand up, and that's about it. Everything else is still pretty much up to them. It's still a personal decision. So leadership, as I've understood it, is really more about how you create the environment and that you provide a way for people to change their behaviors on their own and pull in the same direction that you're trying to go. And it really has more to do with how well you influence other people. Influence their understanding, influence their actions or their reactions, and help them pull in the same direction. And then the other piece about leadership, and this is part that especially for our military audience here, leadership is not necessarily about the positions you have, right? Leadership is really more about how well you make change happen. And it's not just any change. It's a change that's most challenging and that people have been reluctant to take on. And that the true sign of leadership is how well you make that change happen, and then how well you influence other people to help you make that change occur. So in doing that, You have to be ambidextrous in all of those circumstances. Dr. Stewart and I had an opportunity to talk at a college meeting, and I really enjoyed his comments about how you help others be a part of change or help making change. And the piece that I added in my comments was the importance of what diversity meant, diversity and inclusion. And so what I offered is diversity is not what the appearance of looks like. Diversity is all about perspective and what you do to get the greatest number of perspectives into your understanding so that you can apply it to whatever situation you're working in. And this is something that is also sometimes very challenging in our various environments, especially in very hierarchical environments. Being able to get a variety of perspectives to understand what the best opportunities are is oftentimes very challenging. So my recommendation and what I have found is that it is the most senior person in the room for military, and I would offer it's probably in medicine too. It's on the most senior person in the room to make sure they go around to each of the attendees to make sure they're getting the perspective, even the most junior person in that room. What you're going to find is that you'll find those interfaces of ideas, like what I just described with UPS and medicine. You'll find those interfaces that allow you to see things in a slightly different way and then help make a change happen. So I wanted to be able to share some of my experience. I know there might be a few questions or thoughts if we have time for a few of that. But it's been a thrill to be back here in Texas. I made the comment to Dr. Stewart that I realized that I don't eat barbecue anyplace else but Texas. Because it's kind of like, it's like faux barbecue everywhere else, right? And besides that, I don't know what Carolina thinks about the vinegar and the barbecue sauce. That just doesn't do it for me. But I'm very excited to be back here in San Antonio. Had a very lovely time last night. Thank you very much for that event. And I'm just thrilled to be back here in the city that I consider home. So I just got the notice from Navy Flag Matters this week, reminding me that that in about a year it'll be time for me to move on. So I'm looking at you guys in uniform. That I'm looking for the next or couple of iterations from now, DHA director. I think I know that's where our future is. And I think many of you have been in situations where you couldn't understand why we couldn't find a way to work together a little more closely. So I'm hopeful that one of you will continue to bring forward the work that we started here, that actually started in 1948, and we've built through the decades. But thank you very much for spending some time with me this morning, and I look forward to seeing many of you in a variety of settings. I'm looking very much forward to the strengthening of our partnership here in San Antonio. And with that, I'll see if there are any reactions or questions that you might have for me. Thank you very much. And I'll avert my eyes in case that makes it easier for you, okay? So in case you're afraid of direct eye contact. Unless I happen to know you, then I will make direct eye contact. Yes, sir.
I'll do it the right way.
Yes.
Brian Perry, retired Colonel U.S. Air Force. Traumas are the lodge in 05 and 07. How close do you think we are to a purple suit medical corps? Like the South Africa model where there's 4 branches of the military, Army, Air Force, Navy, and Naval.
Yeah. So I like purple. It is one of my colors. But I don't think we're ever going to be purple. And I'll tell you why. So in the military, we have this thing called domains. And domains are the space in which we operate. So domain is like air, space, undersea. And now also cyber is now a new space. So there are certain domains in which there are very unique aspects. And I think I told somebody last night that if one of my Air Force colleagues suddenly found themselves in a submarine, that's probably a bad day for them. So, so there's certain domain-specific areas, but you're right that in medical, there are a lot of things that we should be doing more jointly. But I will also say that there are certain things that we probably want to make sure that we preserve that are domain-specific and service-specific. I don't think that's the overwhelming majority. As a matter of fact, 85 to 90% of what we do in military medicine is similar. And because our hospitals are primarily externally regulated by the same accreditation bodies of all hospitals in the United States, TJC, CAP, any number of we will always have that commonality that we should work very closely on. But I don't think that we're going to ever get to a purple suit. I do think we're going to get to more tri-service effort, and that is what's happening here with the statute. So, thanks for that question. I don't think you'd want to end up in a submarine. No. Yes. Good morning.
My name's James Wong from the TriService Arena program. With the expeditionary surgery teams that they're sending out more and more, and as they become more multidisciplinary, I was wondering how soon, or if you had some sense of when the surgery PA would be integrated with the multidisciplinary.
I think I need to find out a little bit more about that program. I've had a little introduction to that. That is one of those areas where I feel that we should bring more of that into a tri-service arena. Here's what we're up against. No single service has enough assets to do the next war on their own. Nor does any single service have the assets to take care of the healthcare, all of the healthcare in the United States and overseas. The only way that we can do this is if we're able to bring together all of our capabilities in the military health space and be able to extend our capabilities across the broadest range. I do feel that the PA capability is something that we want to include in more expeditionary and not only forward but also in our hospitals. Does that kind of get to your, do you have a specific area about that you're interested in? I mean, I think by your question, you probably feel that there is some value to that. I'm getting some head nods from a lot of other people. So, you know what? It just so happens that I'm the director of the DHA, so let me look at that. I think it's a worthy idea. The idea has merit, and I think that we need to be able to look to see how we can be more effective in these teams going forward. So if you have some ideas, I'd be interested to hear them. And if anybody else would like to contribute to that, that'd be great. Dr. Pruitt?
That was an inspirational talk for the individuals that are contemplating a military career. Do you foresee the establishment of disease-based institutes for all the services? Those patients would be aggregated in that discipline?
Dr. Pruitt, I think that is, we need to move towards that. I think we've done it within our services, but we've got several centers of excellence that need to be coalesced. I think the trauma and the coalescing of that is a great example of how that would work. So I think that we do want to get away from trying to stand up multiple centers of excellence that actually attenuate our collective expertise. So I do feel, and we've seen that now with physical therapy and rehabilitative medicine, as well as orthopedic care, especially with the high number of amputees that we've taken care of in this last conflict. And our ability to come together to set up a couple of sites where there's centers of excellence has proven to be very helpful. I do believe, too, that for our disease or our patient populations with certain medical conditions, we do want to aggregate that. And we need to do it in a tri-service way. Is that what you were referring to? Yes, sir. I think that the model that you've used here in Texas and certainly with trauma care is something that we need to emulate in a lot of different areas of our health system. And I think that's something, too, that the civilian healthcare system is finding out as well. And so it's not necessarily, we can't say that we invented it, or maybe we can in some cases, but it's part of what healthcare is doing everywhere, and we need to do that. Yeah.
Tom Percy, CEO of AMA. Cost is clearly a big issue. And our society drives healthcare based on procedures as opposed to outcomes. What do you see DHA or as a society what we can do to change to move more to a value-based system?
Yeah, thank you. Now, I love that question. I appreciate, and that wasn't a plant. I do believe part of what you're going to see, especially with the military health system and what you're seeing already in the civilian healthcare system, is a move towards more value-based design. But here's the spin that I'd like to put on value-based design for the military. Most of the value-based design systems that you see described, and if you're a student of Porter and Lee, Michael Porter and Tom Lee from Harvard Business Review, you'll note that what they talk about is moving towards more care, concentrated care for certain disease conditions or certain patient populations, kind of similar to what Dr. Pruitt asked about. And so the thought is you can create more value or more profit or increase your margins by doing value-based care in that way that Porter and Lee have designed. They talk about integrated practice units. What I would like to do is put an additional facet to value-based. And here's where people say, well, what I believe we have the opportunity to do is create value from our patient's perspective and figure out what kind of outcomes they're looking for in their care. Great example, one of my pediatric orthopedic surgery colleagues, he has decided that value for him is when it is time for his total joint, and he knows he's going to need a total joint at some point, value for him is being able to go back on the golf course in 10 days. That's what value represents to him. Now, assuming all things are held constant and good in terms of no return to the OR, no readmission, no infection, no complication from the procedure itself, then I don't think it's out of bounds to try to figure out what would our system need to look like in order to get our patient back on the golf course in 10 days. For parents who have a child with an ongoing condition, value to them might mean not having to take their child out of school and the parent not having to take time off from work in order to get the follow-up for their child's condition or reassessment of their child's condition. So I think we have to be able to look at value through that lens and then see how we can actually make that happen. And what I like to ask folks is, what would we need to look like in order to make this happen? And I think that we'd find I know we'd find some savings. We're already starting to do some of that in the National Capital Region. And what we found out is without any additional personnel, we were able to increase our appointments by a third without any additional overhead. So, and I saw, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Guy Clifton. I'm from surgery at Fancy. How do you envision the DHA's interaction or how their role in the movement of personnel and staffing in hospitals? How will that interact with the services that they
Yeah. So, a great question. The services, Army, Air Force, Navy, will still maintain the oversight of their personnel, and I feel that's appropriate. There are certain things that we want to make sure that you continue to get in your own career development as an Army officer, an Air Force officer, and a Navy officer. However, in those areas where we have very robust partnerships and we have the capacity to continue to train folks or expand our ability to work in the community, what I'd like to see is that we're sending people to those sites regardless of what uniform they're wearing. So I really see more tri-service training opportunities, and I'd like to look, especially in our surgical training programs, whether or not we've truly fully optimize the training programs we currently have in the military health system, and then see whether or not we can expand their capacity by partnering with surgical departments in that area, assuming that they would have the right kind of volume and case mix. Is that kind of where you were going with that? Yeah. So, I mean, I use surgery a lot because that's what I know the best. But, I worry about some of these programs that we have in the military where we're having trouble meeting our case volume. And I know that's not dissimilar to what some of the challenges that many surgical training programs are having. But I also know that we have some real gems in the military health system, and we should probably be putting more people into those sites for their training. And we should do that regardless of service. Which is why I asked the question last night, how much more capacity could we create here in San Antonio? Yes, sir.
So, first of all, thank you for perfect address, and thank you for coming. You mentioned the importance of diversity. You mentioned that. I don't think there's a more relevant, poignant story than the Cruz family. If you look, basically, immigrants from the Philippines. Your dad was a 13-year-old really fighting the resistance against the occupied Philippines. Your dad was commissioned colonel from that. Moved to Minnesota, an immigrant family,
Yep.
really without a clear, no categorical position. Gets his spot at the University of Minnesota, and kind of the rest is history in many ways. But I just wonder what your advice would be. I've realized in talking to many young people is that many people feel they don't fit in. They come and they feel like they don't fit into surgery. They're anxious about it, and it crosses a wide variety of domains. I just wonder what you would say to that young person in the room today, or maybe to us as well. What you would say with respect to saying, do I fit in? What should I do? What advice would you give that person?
Yeah, I think that's a really, I mean, it's a question that I've personally experienced over and over again, and that's that do I fit in? So, as Dr. Stewart mentioned, I recently gave the commencement address at the University of Texas, which is my alma mater, and part of my comments had to do with the uniform I was wearing, which were my summer whites, which have the shoulder boards. And the comment I made to them was that, when I was promoted to this job as the director of the Defense Health Agency, it meant that I was going to be promoted to a 3-star admiral, a vice admiral. And in order to get my promotion, I had to have the right uniform equipment, and so I went to get my shoulder boards, only to find out that I had to special order them because they'd never had a female 3-star medical admiral before. So I put in that one order, and I'm hoping that those shoulder boards last me for the next year or so, because I don't know if they've kept the pattern for that, the mold for that. It can be very challenging when you find yourself and you are in an underrepresented group. Dr. Stewart mentioned that I was the first female graduate from the surgery program at Portsmouth, but what he didn't mention is that I was the second female to start the program. So it's, there are challenges out there, and it is not unique to a certain gender or ethnicity or anything like that. It is something that we all experience to a certain degree. So what I'd encourage you, all of you, if there's that moment where you're feeling that do I fit, or is this right for me, or I'm having a hard time moving forward in this, is that you want to make sure that why you're doing it is what really resonates with you. If you want to be that surgeon, if you want to be that leader, if you want to be that agent of change for a particular reason, you want to make sure that that reason truly resonates with you. I mean, for me, the thing that resonates for me more than anything is our patients. I didn't do all this stuff because I thought that I would look good in the shoulder boards with the 3 stars on it. I did it every step of the way was because I thought that we could, that there had to be a way that we could improve our healthcare system for our patients. And you know, it's about making that reason being something outside of you. Dr. Stewart mentioned what my parents have raised us to do, and that's to serve others, to serve our country. You know, part of the reason why my brother, myself, my niece, and even my brother-in-law, and my other brother, and my husband, why we've all served in uniform, is what links us is that there's a sense of purpose and a sense of mission and a sense of return service that we want to give back to our country. So you need to find what that driving goal for you is. And if that driving goal means that you're going to become a surgeon, or you're going to become a trauma surgeon or a critical care specialist, and even if you're in a space where you're not quite sure that you fit in, then what I would advise you is just focus on that goal and keep pressing forward. Because, you know, we need people who are dedicated on a mission. And if you're not in that space without that clear mission, then you want to figure out what is it that you need to do? What is it that you're driven to do? And find that. I will submit to you that when you find that focus and you realize that that's what's going to drive you, that all of a sudden you will find ways that it's not so much whether or not you fit in, it's whether others will be able to keep up with you. And that's where you want to find yourself. But you want to really get dialed in to why you're doing something. I don't know if that helps. Thank you. Yeah, Michelle. Good morning. Yeah, thanks. So, you know, for those of you that are not in the military, we're always looking at the next battle or what the next battle space is going to look like. So we realized with coming off of this conflict that we didn't know to expect IEDs. We didn't know to expect. I mean, you know, we're running the casualty receiving at Bethesda and Walter Reed during the height of the war, and I'm looking at injuries that we haven't even described in the textbooks yet. You know, and the other thing is that we didn't realize how complex these injuries were, these multiple injuries, the blunt and penetrating injuries, but we also didn't anticipate the invisible wounds of war. We didn't anticipate the TBI and the PTS that came with that. I mean, these are things that are still impacting us today. And as a matter of fact, I would say that TBI and PTS have a much more longer impact, more attenuated impact on us. So part of the things that we're looking at is we're probably looking at prolonged holding capability. You know, being able, part of our ability to have such a high rate of survivability is that we were able to move people off the battlefield pretty quickly. And that's, we would sometimes have people at San Antonio, at BAMC, or in Launchstool. We would have people in Launchstool within 24 hours easily. But what was so impressive was how quickly we were able to get people to the United States within 48 hours after injury. And that's something we don't know that we're going to, so we're looking at prolonged field care. I would like to see if we can use some of those autonomous aerial vehicles, and if we can start using some robotics and some of the things that we need to do. So I'm kind of revealing part of my my research interests in that. So I think there's a whole slew of things that we need to war game and figure out what we need to do. But I agree with you. We're going to learn a lot in the first conflict, in the first brush with it. Sorry, did you have something? Yeah. 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 I think we have to revamp. We need to interface and partner with our reserve community in a very different way than we've been doing so. And I also see that the reserve community is where we're going to house a lot of our trauma surgeons as well.
So thank you very much for our residents. We have a reception rather than a morbidity and mortality conference, so that's good. So we'll have a reception where you can a meet and greet. And,
Great.
So thank you very much. We've got a couple things for you. We've got a plaque that's it's emblematic of San Antonio.
Yeah.
And
I love it.
Congratulations. And
Thank
we
you.
have this is a picture of a blue bonnets with. I think this is emblematic of the Cruz family. It's a beautiful flower with the sunrise coming through it. With these little flowers are a thing of beauty, like your family, but they're also tremendously tough and enduring. And it's emblematic of Texas. So
Thank you very much. Is this one of your pictures?
it is.
Oh, thank you. Oh, it's even more special. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll have a reception outside.